Well, this is exciting because if you have been watching all of the videos, this is our last one. And you are also going to be thrilled to understand that this is going to be super short. This is chapter 14. It is our last chapter in A&P 1. It is our last chapter if we're discussing the nervous system. And it is on the autonomic nervous system, a part of the peripheral nervous system that is an involuntary component. So understanding the autonomic nervous system helps you anticipate the effects and side effects of drugs on your patients. Again, why this matters? Because you all want to be some sort of healthcare professional, and understanding the effects and the characteristics of the autonomic nervous system, right, will be important when you're looking at what kind of drugs that your patients should get or are taking. Okay, so we've talked about the autonomic nervous system a couple of times. This is a nervous system that contains a motor neuron, so this is a motor output. This doesn't have anything to do with sensory input. This is the involuntary portion, so it is smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, glands, those three main tissue types and organs that are affected by the autonomic nervous system. So basically, they operate via subconscious control. Autonomic nervous system can also be called the involuntary or the general visceral motor system, but we usually use the ANS. So again, here it is down there on the bottom right in sort of the gold color. It is a peripheral motor autonomic, right? So it's an output. Well, this doesn't look very good. So somatic, right, being voluntary, and autonomic being involuntary. They differ in what they target, right? Somatic, nervous system, muscles, autonomic, glands, smooth muscle, etc. Different pathways and ganglia. So even the pathway that this action potential takes from the central nervous system out to the effector organ is different. And the target organ responds to neurotransmitters in a different way. So the SNS, meaning somatic nervous system, the cell body is in the central nervous system, and one myelinated axon extends directly to the muscle. So directly from my spinal cord, right, directly to my bicep. One path, one thick myelinated axon, really fast. Autonomic nervous system uses a 2-neuron chain, and we're going to see a picture in a minute. The preganglionic neuron has the cell body within the CNS. It goes to a ganglia, and then we go from the ganglia to the effector. All right. Somatic nervous system, most of them, all of them, if we're being honest, use acetylcholine to trigger the muscle cell. In the autonomic nervous system, the first one, remember we have a chain, 2-neuron chain. The first one releases acetylcholine to the second one, and the second one can either release norepinephrine or acetylcholine. It's either stimulatory or inhibitory depending on the type of receptor. Now there is some overlap, right? The higher brain centers regulate and coordinate both systems. For example, if somebody, threw something or crashed a window, I would hear that, I would feel fear, and at the same time, I would get up, right? I would want to run around, which is somatic. I would also have an increase in respiratory rate and heart rate, which is autonomic. So they do work together, they coordinate, usually involving the skeletal muscles, like I just said, and the visceral organs. So here we go. So on the top, that single line is the somatic nervous system, the brain, spinal cord, muscles, nervous system. Cell body in the central nervous system, axon, acetylcholine, muscle. Done. Stimulatory only contracting. The bottom gets a little more dicey. We have the autonomic nervous system. If you follow the green, right, we have a 2-neuron chain in which we have a myelinated preganglionic axon secreting acetylcholine. Then we have the postganglionic axon, or the gland, secreting norepinephrine. We're going to target any of the smooth muscle glands or cardiac muscles, and it could be stimulatory or inhibitory depending on the neurotransmitter. So if it secretes acetylcholine, right? Norepinephrine, it goes up. If it secretes acetylcholine, it goes down. Parasympathetic, lightly myelinated axon, secreting acetylcholine, that's the same. Then the second one is going to secrete acetylcholine again. So parasympathetic, acetylcholine, rest and digest. Right? Sympathetic secretes norepinephrine, up, excitatory. So again, take a good long look at this. Look at where the cell body is. Look at the axons. Are they heavily or lightly myelinated or non-myelinated? What is the neurotransmitter and what is the effector organ in the effect? So there are two arms of the autonomic nervous system. The parasympathetic, maintenance, conserving energy, resting, digesting. Sympathetic, up, mobilizing, up, up, up. Increase in respiratory rate, increase in heart rate. And the autonomic nervous system is a dual innervation system. We talked about this briefly in chapter 11. When we have the heart, we have the sympathetic that's saying beat faster. We have the parasympathetic that's saying beat slower. And they are dynamic and they antagonize each other, not in a bad way, but they maintain that homeostasis. We can't just have increase. Your heart rate would just go 200 miles an hour. We can't just have decrease because your heart rate would be at 5. So we need to have the ups and downs, and that this works with the dual innervation system of the autonomic nervous system. So let's take parasympathetic in general. The nerves originate from the brain and the spinal cord, in the sacral spinal cord. So the parasympathetic, the nerves originate top and bottom of the central nervous system. The ganglia are located inside the visceral organ. They both stimulate with acetylcholine. It is a rest and digest. The sympathetic, in the other way, they originate in the thoracic and lumbar spine. So that's the sympathetic are going to originate from the middle of the body, the middle of the spinal cord. We have a preganglionic axon stimulating with acetylcholine. The postganglionic axon is going to be epinephrine or norepinephrine, like that picture said. So so we talked on this, right? Craniosacral versus thoracolumbar. The long preganglionic and short, so the opposite. Long, their first ganglia is long, the second one is short in parasympathetic. In sympathetic, the first one is short and the second one is long. The ganglia are located parasympathetically right near the organ, and in sympathetic, they lie close to the spinal cord. And this is better, just to look at this picture. So you'll see the brain and the spinal cord in both pictures. You'll see that the purple in the parasympathetic, the eye, salivary glands, heart, lungs, stomach, etc., all the way down to the liver, everything is right there from the brainstem. The bladder and the genitals right from the sacral spinal cord. This is the parasympathetic. This is the resting and digesting, the slowing down of the heart, the digesting, right? That kind of stuff. On the right-hand side, you have the sympathetic in green. You'll see that all of the spinal nerves from T1 to L, I'm going to say 3 or 4, are going to, that's where they're going to originate. You'll notice that the preganglionic fibers are short. Then you'll see the sympathetic chain ganglia, and then you'll see all of those extensions on the right-hand side. But again, eye, salivary glands, lungs, heart, stomach, you have the same organs on both sides, the bringer-downers and the bringer-uppers. So these are the anatomical differences in a chart. The origin, the location of the ganglia, the relative length, the rami communicants, the degree of branching, the functional role, and the neurotransmitters. This is a great one, right, to have open when you're doing your chapter 14 quiz or print it out, because that gives you all the anatomical as well as the physiological differences between them. All right, and that's going to be really important. So the parasympathetic is called the craniosacral division, long preganglionic fibers, short postganglionic fibers. Right here, you can see that picture again, right? The dark purple fibers go right to the organ, and then you see those little teeny tiny light purple ones. That's showing you the long preganglionic fiber and the short ganglionic fiber. The sympathetic is the opposite. We have the short preganglionic fibers and then the long ganglionic fibers. Thoracolumbar spine. All right, just another picture showing you the different rami communicants. Notice how the cardiac and pulmonary plexes, right? That's one of the really more complicated sympathetic innervations, because you'll notice how we get everything from the cervical region down to T3 in order to power the heart and the lungs or tell it what to do. So it does get a little bit more complicated than what we're talking about here. All right, visceral reflexes. Now, visceral reflexes are, they're going to sense stretch and temperature, things like that. They're going to sort of be inside, right, your viscera, your organs, for example. And they're going to send information about changes, right? The cell body is a little bit different. The cell bodies are located in the dorsal root ganglia, the sensory ganglia of the cranial nerves, and the axons travel the same way as the autonomic motor fibers, right? But they're sort of monitoring the conditions inside the viscera. So the visceral reflex arc, all right, same components as a somatic reflex arc, which we talked about in chapter 13. Receptor, sensory neuron, integration sensor, motor neuron, and effector, right? But they're a little bit different. All right. And these are going to be visceral reflexes. These are not like I hit my, under my knee and my leg. These are visceral. Emptying your rectum, emptying your bladder, right? Those are going to be visceral reflex arcs. All right. So you'll see here receptor in the viscera itself, right? So it's, for example, in the bladder, the receptor, the stretch receptor in the bladder, when the bladder gets full, the receptor triggers, sends the information to the integration center, right, spinal ganglia, and says, okay, you should go to the bathroom. And so that's going to be the response. But it's initiated within the viscera itself. If we want to talk about the neurotransmitters, right, acetylcholine, norepinephrine, and again, looking at this somatic nervous system versus autonomic nervous system, and you can see the different neurotransmitters there. This is a whole list of different types of drugs that work, if you'll notice, on the receptors that are normally activated by neurotransmitters. So nicotinic agents, right? That's going to be smoking and things like that, or smoking cessation products. But the nicotine works on anything that is an acetylcholine receptor. Well, that's going to be a stimulant, right? Nicotine's a stimulant. So understanding this, right, this goes back to the first slide where I said, go and watch that, because understanding how the autonomic nervous system works will give you an idea on how certain drugs are going to work. All right, look at the second one. Bethanechol, right? Bethanechol is going to increase bladder contraction, right? So that's going to work on what's called an ACH receptor, a muscarinic ACH receptor in the parasympathetic. So it's going to go and it's going to cause bladder contraction, right? Parasympathetic, resting, digesting. So take a look at these, right? Albuterol and propranolol, right, for hypertension. These all work on the autonomic nervous system. So again, most visceral organs are dual innervated, parasympathetic and sympathetic tone. Usually one predominates, but in a few they have a cooperative effect. This is the effect of each one, and you should look at all of these to see, what, if any, effect. So the adrenal medulla, there's no parasympathetic effect. It's only stimulatory, right? With the heart, the parasympathetic decreases the heart rate. Sympathetic increases the heart rate. So take a look at this. We will use this in labs, so you will look at this, more than once. But just give you an idea of how each side of the autonomic nervous system affects the different organs, all the way down to the gallbladder and the blood vessels. You'll notice that sometimes there's no parasympathetic effect, a lot of them. But for the most part, every single one has a sympathetic effect. Up, up, up. All right. All right, so that's the end of chapter 14. Again, get in there and watch those videos, because it's really important that you get more than my blah, blah, blah. right? Go watch the videos, go watch all the links, make sure you understand your topics, bring any questions to lab, and I will see you then.